You have before you is an amendment to the Land Management Ordinance, the LMO, to amend Section 16-2-103F7, clarifying the process for reviewing requested amendments to a previously platted major subdivision of Title 16 of the Municipal Code of the Town of Hilton Head. The exhibit of Section 7 is originally that this section of the LMO appeared before Planning Commission in December of 2022. After reading by Town Council, it was remanded back to Planning Commission before you today for your review and approval. The exhibit that you have before you has the purpose and intent of these provisions is to require additional review and approval of proposed amendments to previously approved single-family residential major subdivisions. The change by Town Council before its remanding back to Planning Commission omitted the words commonly owned property in the second paragraph and added as Section B the words such as open space, rights of way, amenities, and parking to any lot combinations or subdivisions. This is to clarify the original reading that was before you previously in December of 2022. And for any additional questions, the provisions of this section shall not apply to family subdivisions approved pursuant to Section 16-2-103Y, as that is a separate section of the code. And what is before you today is only Section 16-2-103F7. Thank you.
Let me, a couple of questions just as we get started here. Ashley, would you please describe for us the difference between a major subdivision and a minor one in terms of, how you gauge that?
Sure. The differences between a major and minor subdivision as pertain to our code is that a major subdivision would be more than 5 lots of record. Part of major subdivisions versus minor subdivisions is when we talk about the replotting of a subdivision or re-subdivision. The deviation to what you have in front of you today is that the deviation is that in a control of this change process, we will review the new major subdivision or re-subdivision so that the previous major subdivision, it could have occurred 10 years ago, 5 years ago, at any previous point in time. We are looking at each of the parts of the code that you would as if it was a fresh subdivision today, with the detail that is items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And
All right. Comments by the Commission, Mr. D'Arienzo?
Just to make sure I understand this.
So on February 14th, it went before Town Council, who approved deviations to platted single-family residential subdivisions. And a week later, on the 21st of February, there was a change of heart, and now it's titled Deviations from Previously Approved Major Subdivisions.
yes, the title of the code is to clarify exactly the section of that code, but it is the reading of the words in the section that is where the intent of our code is to follow through with the update.
And so, in this case, if there are more than 5 lots associated with the subdivision, it's considered to be major, and it will be reviewed and resubmitted to this Planning Commission if any of these 5 items come into play, dealing with increased burdens on amenities, overcrowding, increased noise and traffic, decreased utility of amenities, an increased burden on the roadways.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Sebo.
No questions at this time.
Okay, Mr. Hens.
Just in layman's terms, what didn't we get right in December that they want to fine tune now, just in general?
Part of when this was in a larger package of LMO amendments, the part to this that was questioned here was tied into how specific we are looking at the subdivision process. And so the section before this, which is section 16-2-102, went through town council, but this is the detail to that. And by the detail to this here in section 7, the proposed change, the detriments that you're looking at are listed in the more details here. The previous section of the code, if you're looking at the entire code, would just say that subdivisions of this type go before the planning commission today, period.
So there's going to be less potentially that comes before us because of this, because now it has to include one of these details. So we're liable to get more or less because of this.
I don't think it's going to change the overall volume. It's just that when there's, as before, when there was a change to a major subdivision, it was going to go through a public process. So what did get approved last night was the other half of this, that going back to Planning Commission for a public hearing is a requirement. This is the language that got pulled from that amendment approval set and is before you today. And really the major changes were to clarify that it didn't apply to family subdivisions, and then to provide some language and process for what the amendment process is for minor subdivisions, which are the last two statements. And then the red language that's before you show the changes that were made by town council last night. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Mr. Campbell.
I have no questions at this time.
Mr. O'Neill. I have one, for fair purposes of clarification, would you tell the commission how a family subdivision differs from these two categories that may come out? Could you go through that a little bit?
Sure. So a family subdivision doesn't have a size cap to it, so it doesn't have, a family subdivision has to meet a different set of criteria to be considered through that application mechanism. Also, the language for family subdivisions, if you're going to deviate from what was approved at that family subdivision, it would convert back to either a major or a minor subdivision of whatever that size was if the conditions of the family subdivision could no longer be met, such as if it was sold to someone that didn't meet the requirements from which the family subdivision was created. So it has its own process built in.
Yeah, separate category, separate definition.
Correct.
It doesn't fall underneath necessarily. All right. Are there any other further comments on behalf of the commission? Are there any public comments on this particular area? Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Chester Williams. The town council considered this last night, and I have suggested the revisions that are up there, and I said they've taken it to heart. A couple of things that I didn't mention. Well, one of them that I didn't mention, the idea here is to protect owners who bought off of a previously approved plat. That being the case, until the developer has contracted to or has actually sold lots, I think you ought to be free to make whatever changes they want to make before it's finalized. I don't know that you want to require a developer to come back through this process prior to having sold any lots, prior to anybody else having relied on the plat that was approved. So I think that's one thing to consider. Another is, Why is it limited just to residential subdivisions? I mean, don't the same principles apply to a commercial subdivision? So take those two things into consideration. Thanks.
Anyone else have a comment on this particular item? All right, members of the commission, in terms of what we need to do here is to get, if we approve, to get this back to town council, adopt this ordinance authorizing these amendments. Taking into account what we've just heard from the councilor, I don't know that we're putting a hand grenade in this thing or not by making it other than residential. Any thoughts along the line here?
I have
Yes.
some thoughts.
What does staff have to think about that? Yeah.
Sure. So the process, if you would like to add in for how you would amend or deviate from a commercial subdivision, we could add that to be the same as the process identified for the deviation from a minor subdivision.
How do you all feel about that?
I don't view that as a minor change.
Well, if you read the language, it says that the minor subdivision may be modified or amended only in accordance with the current procedures and standards established for the creation. So that's what we have for minor subdivision in this language. And if you choose to, that could be the language for commercial subdivisions.
So that's 4 lots or less, right? 5 or less, excuse me. And then if we go on the majors, how many lots is there? There's no, it's anything over 5, right? It's a major. And so
All
it could be
commercial.
a large area, right? Lot of lots.
For commercial,
Yeah, I mean, I just want to try to think it through. If we put commercial in here, or recommend that to town council, how many different, it could be a large subdivision, let's say, for example, if it's a large acreage and has a lot of lots that can be constructed in there. I'm just wondering if there's any, that if we're throwing a hand grenade in town council, I don't want to do that.
well, the process is identified before you for the deviation from a major residential subdivision, and that process is there. So I guess for Mr. Williams, I would like some clarification on what he's requesting that we consider adding as it relates to commercial.
Would be helpful, sir.
If I may,
Yes.
with respect to major and minor, all commercial subdivisions are major subdivisions, even a subdision of 2 lots.
Okay.
So, and when you read the heading there, approved major subdivisions, okay? Well, major subdivisions, that's 6 or more residential or any commercial. But then when you read the first paragraph, it restricts it, limits it down to single-family residential subdivisions. And like I said, if the intent is to protect the interests of owners who have bought off of a particular plat, and that plat's going to be changed, then the principle is exactly the same for residential as it is for commercial. Does a commercial property owner who bought off of a plat deserve less protection than a residential property owner who's bought off of a approved plat? And so I think maybe just strike, single family residential wherever it shows up in there.
Any other comments? Thank you, sir.
Did the staff just not consider that?
Yeah, well, I think it came up with the context of residential, the issue being attended to one or more particular residential subdivision. So that's naturally, I think the staff is focused on that. I mean, when I put on I'm representing the developer hat, well, I'm looking for ways to get around this if I can. And for a commercial subdivision, the language right now doesn't apply to it.
Okay. Do we have a motion from any of the commissioners with regard to this potential amendment before we go take it to town council?
So, just to follow follow up on these last few conversations. If we look, Misty, if we look at that first italicized right there.
Yep, there and here.
So we add approved single-family residential, major subdivisions, and/or commercial subdivisions.
We currently don't designate commercial or residential. It's either a major subdivision or a minor in our application process.
Oh, so strike, so we might want to strike single-family residential.
Minor subdivision.
That doesn't, I mean, that still keeps the, I'm just rereading it to make sure that the regulatory intent is maintained. And then, for no matter if it's a residential or commercial, the process for major subdivisions is, I think it's going to be fine. I think the intent is still there. We'll have to review that, but it would be removal of these words, removal of right here, single-family residential right there, maybe,
Yes.
and then,
Does it appear anywhere else?
let me reread it.
All right. Anybody want to make a motion on that?
Well, instead of changing it on the fly, could we give staff an opportunity to update this and then reconsider it in 2 weeks? We've done it in 2 weeks.
Or actually, next week, next Wednesday.
What's next one? I'd rather
Is
not.
there any sense of urgency on this from the town council?
There is.
That's why we're meeting today. isn't it?
That's correct. There is.
That's why we had the special meeting today. Because there is some sense of urgency here.
Because somebody's making a move.
No,
All I know is that the town council asked us to schedule a special meeting to consider this today. Does anyone else want to make a motion with this regard to striking these words, single-family residential from this particular proposal? Hearing none, then we will leave it as it is.
No, I'll submit a motion to strike single-family residential as shown on that page from both, that paragraph and the following paragraph.
Wherever it appears.
Yes.
All right, is there a second for that motion? Mr. Seabolt will second that motion. All right, let's have a vote on it. Any further public comment? No? All right, all in favor of striking those words, single-family, single-family
single,
residential?
however, can I interject here? It looks like, to be consistent, that right here it says if we're striking single-family residential, it still says major here.
Yeah.
And if we're striking single-family residential, we need the word major right here.
Fair enough. All right, with that amendment to the amendment, all in favor of striking those words, please raise your right hand. I have all but one, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1 on the quote. All right, so that now is been stricken, and now I would consider entertaining a motion on the entire recommendation of town council to adopt adoption of the ordinance authorizing these amendments. Is there such a motion? Mr. O'Neill moves. Is there a second?
A second.
Mr. Campbell seconds. Okay, all in favor of recommending this to town council with these changes that we've made, please raise your right hand. Okay, we have a 5-to-1 vote on that. All right, thank you, Missy, and thank you, Ashley, for your helping us out to get through this. All right, next item we have here our commission business. There's nothing new. We will be meeting again. What's the date of our next meeting? Next Wednesday, that's correct. All right, and so we will have a report. Also, I've asked staff to brief us on, at the last meeting, we had the folks from the RV park complaining about the public service district's work there along Dunnigan Valley. And so I've asked staff if at our next meeting next week, if they would give us a report as to, they had met with the Public Service District and to make sure they're aware of the comments they received in the public hearing and wanted to see what the reaction is from Public Service District. So I'm asking staff to provide us with a staff report at our next meeting on Wednesday. Last item under Chairman's report is that I have submitted my resignation to the mayor and effective March 31st of end of this month. And for both personal and professional reasons, I just do not have the time anymore. I have taken on some new clients in my consulting business that requires a lot more travel, including international. And so it really will conflict with trying to meet as often as we do. And so I've asked the mayor to, when they interview our new participants for this commission, to keep that in mind, and he is well aware of it. I've talked to him about it before previously. So I have one more meeting with you guys next week, and I'll have a little something to say at that, but I want to thank you all for being, for entertaining me in my silliness up here from time to time. Are there any staff reports?
No, sir.
No, sir. Okay. With that, we have concluded our day's business here, so I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.